Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another week of our Bible study in Exile. Today we're going through Yom Kippur and maybe getting through the moral teachings of the book of Leviticus, such as we might be able to cover. Maybe even flying through the whole thing. We'll have to see. But first, we should probably pray. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Our Lady, Seat of Wisdom, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So I'm a bit brief today on the prayer, but in part that's because I want to highlight the Our Father as encapsulating all other forms of prayer. That's something that the fathers of the church have emphasized, and how it covers the very forms of prayer we talked about were foreshadowed in and signified in the sacrifices, right? We say, Our Father, hallowed be your name. That's praise. It's a perfect offering of sacrifice, of praise. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's supplication, right? Which is contained within the thank offering. So we have the Holocaust, we have the thank offering. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. The idea of the guilt offering, of excuse me, of confessing one's guilt in hopes of being forgiven. So you have that sort of a reciprocity that true forgiveness demands. So the Our Father has that. And deliver us from evil. Well, I guess more hallowed be your name. We'll jump back over there. Can be called adoration in the purest form. So that deliver us from evil, presuming also that we can give thanks to God for the benefits and blessings that He brings us. So the Our Father contains the four kinds of prayer we've alluded to. Adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, supplication. But why don't we go to that sacrifice of sacrifices, that feast of feasts, Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is interesting because it's not recounted as one of the three principal feasts of the year. In the book of Exodus, when we heard about the three principal feasts, they were all linked to different harvests. We had the Passover, of course, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. There's the Feast of Weeks, which takes place 50 days later. That's Shavuot or Pentecost. That takes place, well, we celebrate it as Pentecost with the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, fulfilling the true fruitfulness of creation in a way that an agricultural ceremony or service could only hint at. And then the ancient Jews had the Feast of Sukkot, of Booths, in October. And that became sort of, I believe, the grape harvest, that sort of harvest. So that became the basis of that feast. So all of these were agricultural in origin and then grew to take a religious significance as the scriptures lay out for us. And from there, we have the significance of this feast, which is linked to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah being Rosh Hashanah, sometimes you hear it called the Hebrew New Year. But when you look at what the book of Exodus contains, the Hebrew New Year was actually at Passover, which was to be the first month of your calendar. But again, it's been 3,000 years since that was handed on, and so the calendar has changed a little bit. And so they had a new year in the fall, and linked with it on the 10th day of that new month, of that new year, was this feast, the Day of Atonement. And it's interesting because there's a lot of debate over how this feast came to develop. Some have thought that it was a long-standing festival that came to be formally codified. Some believe it was an emergency measure, and it came to be regarded as a feast based on, well, what that emergency entailed. Let's look at that reading, because I think Leviticus hints at that sort of a reading. In fact, maybe I've said this before, the Torah, the five books of the Bible, are broken up by how they're read. So in the course of a year, you go through the entire Torah, at least that's my sense of it. And the first few words of each section are linked to the particular Sabbath on which they're read. So they're read year after year on that particular Sabbath. And this selection, chapter 16, begins another reading selection that would be for a new week, and it's Aharet Mot, which means after the death. Well, whose death are we talking about? Well, if you were here last week, you'll remember that we were dealing with the sons of Aaron, right? Nadab and Abihu, those poor guys, who, in having offered a strange fire to the Lord, had been consumed by the glory of the Lord. And we went through how that could be a very terrifying prospect and not an easy one for Aaron, but that there's something about God's magnificence and presence that requires a degree of care that it seems they didn't have. And so, following that, we had a whole list of different impurities and how they're to be dealt with. And here we are again back with a narrative. And again, the very first words of this in the Hebrew, Aharei Mot, the sense that after the death of their two sons. And so I've alluded in the past, and I'll just say briefly now in case you weren't here for the previous explanation, simply that oftentimes in the Old Testament, you'll have, especially in the Torah, the first 5 books, you'll have a story, but the story will kind of let up for a bit so that they can lay out the rules related to that story. And then you pick up the story again. So we just had about 4 or 5 chapters of rules related to the story, and here we are again with the story picking back up. So again, the idea then that Yom Kippur might have been this emergency ritual after Nadab and Abihu had violated the sanctuary with some strange fire. So, let's get to it, right? Chapter 16. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. Thus only shall Aaron enter the ark, with a bull of the herd for a purification offering and a ram for a burnt offering." So again, that sin offering, we might call it, and the burnt offering is a holocaust. That's the other term that's sometimes used for that. He shall be dressed in a sacral linen tunic, with linen breeches next to his flesh, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban. They are sacral vestments. He shall bathe his body in water, and then put them on. See, these are the kind of clothes you bathe in order to wear. That's how important they are. I don't mean to be facetious, but you think when bathing was a much more difficult thing to do, yeah, they were the clothes you let get dirty, and they're the ones you didn't. These are the ones you didn't. And from the Israelite community he shall take 2 goats for a purification offering and a ram for a burnt offering. So, just to lay out right off the bat, this idea that while Aaron has authority over the sanctuary, it's not for him to enter the full sanctuary on his own terms whenever he likes. This makes it clear that there's supposed to be reticence even from the high priest in the face of the covenant. And any priest to follow, even those of Jesus Christ, have to have that degree of reticence when they talk, say, of the conscience of a penitent or regarding the mysteries of God, to not be overly familiar with what they serve and minister. Okay? And this involves then considerable preparation in clothing and in bathing for the ceremony to come. Aaron is to offer his own bull of purification, to make expiation for himself and for his household. Then he shall take 2 he-goats and let them stand before the Lord at the tent of meeting, and he shall place lots upon the 2 goats, as in he's going to figure out which one's going to get which destiny. One will be marked for the Lord, and the other marked for Azazel. Azazel here refers to a local deity, but ultimately it's better to consider it the goat marked for banishment. You know, Azazel is a name, but it's kind of like talking about like gremlins that futz with your work. You're not literally saying there are gremlins around futzing or screwing up your work. And so it is when you mark out a goat for Azazel. You're not saying, oh, there's this other god Azazel. It's rather used as a way of describing how this goat is meant to end up. Okay, let's keep going. Aaron shall bring forward the goat designated by lot for the Lord. Now you think, well, which goat gets it better? It's debatable, right? The goat designated by lot for the Lord, which he is to offer as a purification offering. So that goat is slaughtered and sacrificed in the sanctuary. While the goat designated by lot for Azazel shall be left standing alive before the Lord, to make expiation with it and send it off to the wilderness for Azazel. This is sometimes called the scapegoat. Maybe you've heard of scapegoating. And it comes from this ritual on Yom Kippur, namely that there's going to be a goat that bears the sins of the people and then is banished from the camp. Aaron shall then offer his bull of purification offering to make expiation for himself and his household. So again, primarily and first is purifying himself for this role. That's the beginning of this process. Secondly, then, he takes some of the coals and makes an incense offering from that. Then with the incense in the tent, again, the goat is sacrificed outside for his preparation. The incense is offered inside. He takes some of the blood of the bull and sprinkles it inside the Holy of Holies. Remember, the tabernacle in the wilderness had 3 tiers. There's the outer court where the animal sacrifices actually took place. There's the tent, and there's kind of the outer part of the tent. Think of a church, right? You have maybe the area surrounding a church. We might call that like a shrine, right? Like, you have the grounds of a church. Then you have the church building itself, and you have the part where the people tend to sit. And then you have the sanctuary, right? The sanctuary. And so, roughly speaking, that's roughly like what the tabernacle in the wilderness and the temple in Jerusalem were like. There was the part that the people could go to, or the men could go to, namely the part where you bring a sacrifice, which was the man's job to bring to the temple. There's the part, and the priest would sacrifice it outdoors there. The interior part of the temple, or the exterior part of the temple, kind of like the equivalent of where you would step in for Mass, that's where you would have the showbread, you'd have incense, you'd have the menorah, the lampstand, all the accoutrements that are involved. And then there would be at the end, covered by a curtain, the Holy of Holies, which you were not allowed to see. Okay, and certainly the priests were not allowed to see. And even the high priest would only be able to see it once a year, on this day. And now he's going in with that blood of purification from the bull and sprinkling different parts of the inner sanctuary 7 times. Then he slaughters the people's goat of purification. So notice how the priest's purification offering, his sin offering, and again, sin here is called a purification offering because the sins we're talking about aren't moral guilt, they're ritual guilt. They come from contact with the dead or from involvement with sexual matters, which are not called sins in the sense of being morally wrong. But the covenant makes clear, the sacrificial system makes clear, that God does not have a direct role in these things, at a time when plenty of pagan deities were thought to. So, he brings the bull in to make atonement for himself, and then he brings the people's goat of purification, which is a less expensive offering. So the people get off more easily than the priest does. And he brings its blood behind the curtain and sprinkles likewise over the cover and the front of the cover. Thus it says, verse 16, chapter 16, "Thus he shall purge the shrine of the uncleanness and transgression of the Israelites, whatever their sins, and he shall do the same for the tent of meeting, which abides with them in the midst of their uncleanness." So, the idea then is there's this distinction, but both are at work. There's the uncleanness that is not a moral concern, but needs to be purged because God lives in their midst, and respecting him involves being clean of these things by his system that he set up. And then there are the actual transgressions, the sins themselves. Excuse me. The sins properly speaking. And these also are atoned for on this day. And so it's interesting how this begins as a purification ritual, but it quickly takes on a moral tone as well. And to this day, I mean, now they don't have a temple to worry about, but it becomes focused more on the moral question. We can go through what contemporary practice for Yom Kippur looks like. And again, I don't really go that often. I'm not Jewish, but from what it's been summarized to me, I can summarize that at least. So, then he makes expiation for himself and his household and the whole congregation by putting his blood in the Holy of Holies. And no one else can be in the tent of meeting until he comes out. There's a line that is, especially in the time of the temple, that he would have a rope around his ankle in the event that he were to collapse in the tabernacle or the temple, so that he could be pulled out because no one else was to go in. But when he finishes this expiation, He shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord and purge it. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and of the goat and apply it to each of the horns of the altar, and the rest of the blood he shall sprinkle on it with his finger 7 times. So there's the place of God's presence, and then there's the altar of sacrifice. And it's interesting that they are distinct. And both of them need to be purified and consecrated. Now, after all of this is done, so what's been killed so far? You got the bull that was sacrificed for the transgressions and the impurity of the priest, and you had the goat that was sacrificed for the impurity of the people. Now he takes the living goat, right? This is the goat marked out for Azazel, okay? And he takes that goat. And Aaron shall lay both of his hands upon the head of the live goat, and confess over it all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and it shall be sent off in the wilderness through a designated man. So there's this sense then that once the impurities are purged from the sanctuary, they're to be carried off. This is done through this goat. This is something that needs to be done verbally. It can't just be symbolized. It's rather fully reckoned with by the priest, such as he's able to do. And I think we find this with confession ourselves, right? The idea that when you've done something wrong, or in the dynamic of friendship or a relationship or a marriage, the idea that even to name the problem can help so much in the context of it. And rightly, again, oftentimes we can be afraid. We can be afraid of calling things out as we see them and saying them as we are, especially with those with whom we're closest. And it can be a very brave thing to bring up to a wife or a husband the way you see things, or to try to reckon with what needs to be addressed. But it can be such grounds for true reconciliation and deeper unity and charity. But again, I don't live in a marriage, but I would imagine this could be the case if you have the right dynamic and disposition there. And if not, well, that's kind of tough too, right? You kind of got to ride it out. So, the live goat's brought forward, there's expiation done over it, and it's carried out into the wilderness and set free there, carrying all their iniquities. So once that's done, and again, that's done to a designated man, the high priest doesn't need to go out of the camp himself to do that. So then Aaron goes into the tent of meeting, takes off the linen vestments that he put on, these holy, holy garments that he had, and he leaves them in the sanctuary, and then he takes another bath. Makes sense? Then he puts on his proper vestments. So these would be the ones that he uses in a more ordinary way, on a more ordinary basis. And the note here says, this is the removal of contaminated garments, the disposal of the flesh, and the purification of those who have been secondarily defiled as a result of their roles in the ritual. So basically from this point, it's about how you clean up. So for the high priest, having made expiation, having offered a purification offering for himself, a sin offering, but again, we're talking about not moral contagion, but this ritual impurity. He simply takes another bath, puts on other clothes, and then he carries out the rest of the burnt offerings and purification offerings that remain. The one who went out to set out the goat, the one marked for Azazel, shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. After that, he may re-enter the camp. Okay, so a lot of emphasis on each individual participant of this being pure. Again, the same way, say you're working with an electrician and they're told, this is high voltage. We have to take all of these steps to safeguard ourselves. That's the kind of emphasis we're talking about here with the divine majesty, that it is that risky. So then you have the bull of the purification offering and the goat of the purification offering, whose blood was brought in to purge the sanctuary. Their hides, flesh, and dung shall be consumed in fire. So those things are burnt outside the camp. He who burned them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. After that he may re-enter the camp. This shall be to you a law for all time. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall practice self-denial. So again, notice it's the 7th month. In current Hebrew reckoning, it's actually the 1st month. But, so it goes. Back then it would be seen as the 7th month. 7th month, 10th day of the year, 10th day of the month, you shall practice self-denial. The self-denial we're talking about is often translated as discipline and fasting. And to this day, Yom Kippur is the most serious day, I believe, for Jewish self-denial and abstinence, where they don't eat from sunup to sundown. They're not allowed to work. Well, that's about to be said. You shall practice self-denial, and you shall do no manner of work, neither the citizen nor the alien who resides among you. So you're not even allowed to tolerate it among those who aren't Hebrew or Jewish. For on this day atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you of all your sins. You shall be clean before the Lord. It shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for you, and you shall practice self-denial. It is a law for all time. This is, this is something that is meant to be a proper and fulfilling rest. And there's a note here concerning it, if I may pull it up. 2332, sorry. Okay. It's a phrase used only of the Sabbath and the Day of Atonement, highlighting the strict and total abstention from labor required in order for the atonement rituals to be effective. So again, Yom Kippur need not take place on a Sabbath. It could vary through the days of the week, depending on how it falls. But it has this value as a day that is meant to be free from rest, and no other feast has that particular capacity or expression. And so that also lays out how solemn this day has become. That said, it's kind of hard for us to understand, but my sense of it from my various Jewish friends of how this is celebrated is the time leading up to it is one in which you have to be ready to apologize to others for however you may have wronged them in the past year. So again, that idea of forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Being ready to forgive and ask forgiveness seems to be part of this whole experience. And that this translates into refraining from work and fasting to such a great degree. It's interesting, no? Very interesting. So, the rest of this talks about how this is to carry on for the ages to come. And so that's interesting, right? It didn't really start that way. When we heard about it in Exodus, right, this is a feast that's to stand at the head of your calendar. Here, it looks at first like more of a, here's what you're to do, Aaron, now that Nadab and Abihu have brought impurity into the temple, into the tabernacle. Here, that seems to come more at the end. And so some scholars take this as an indication to see how this is a feast that grew over time in exile. And especially now that there is no tabernacle that gets in contact with impurity, there's a sense in how the Jewish people, dispossessed of their land, dispossessed of temple worship, have come to a point where they understand their moral lives to demand that purification, and that was the heart of this teaching. I think we can echo their sentiment there, but to say that it's interesting to turn it in the light of the Christian light of the moral purity we're meant to have. Having already had a Yom Kippur, not needing a day to act out that atonement, but having to extend that mercy forward, knowing that that atonement has already been won. And so St. Paul will say that Christ has become a sin offering for us, alluding to the reality of this sacrifice. You know, his sacrifice is described in various ways, both as a whole burnt offering, I believe that's in Hebrews, and from St. Paul talking about it as a sin offering. The sense that Christ then fulfills all of these rituals and anchors their reality in our life here and now. Okay, well, with that, why don't we go on and see the sense of what follows? Hopefully we can get through the rest of Leviticus, because I think Numbers is an interesting read. And again, I know this is only our third week in Leviticus, but I'm well aware of how many have found it to be their Waterloo in their effort to read through the whole Bible. So I don't want to lean too much on how it goes. So chapter 17 speaks of how every offering, every sacrificed animal has to be done in the context of the temple. Now, this wasn't practical when you lived miles away from the temple, but there's a unity of sacrifice, of eating meat, and of religious observance. And there are various niceties to it, but we're going to have to leave it with that. But just to say that violating these things would demand cutting off the person from his people. And that can sound harsh, but there's a sense in which the way of life enjoined here is one that needs to be followed. Okay. Various parts of this talk about how the animals are to be slaughtered, how they are not to take part, Israelites are not to consume the blood, they're not to eat food that's been torn by beasts or killed in the wild without being hunted, various ritual prescriptions like that. So, 18, though, is where this really ramps up and gets interesting. This is the heart of what's called the Holiness Code. And we'll see how much of this we can get through. So again, 17 sort of wraps up that ritual impurity, but now we're moving to what many regard as the heart of the Pentateuch and the heart of the book of Leviticus, namely this Holiness Code. And what this allows is it allows a sense of holiness that many believe goes to the very earliest times in which this book would have been received and even written. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites, and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. My rules alone shall you observe, and faithfully follow my laws. I am the Lord." So there's this constant refrain, I am the Lord. Now remember that strictly speaking is the tetragrammaton. It's the proper name of God. It's not Adonai, though it's often said that way out of reverence for not repeating God's holy name. But he's simply saying, listen and obey these, and he ratifies it in his own name, in his own authority. That's the way we can understand that. Next, verse 5. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live. I am the Lord. None of you shall come near any one of his own flesh to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord, namely incest. Okay, no incest. Your father's nakedness, that is, the nakedness of your mother, you shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Hopefully self-evident, but also contained here. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father. So if your father remarries, she's off limits, which ought to be fairly easy to accept as well. The nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter, or your mother's, whether born into the household or outside, do not uncover. Okay, fair enough. Again, I don't think I'm losing you yet. The nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter. Do not uncover their nakedness, for their nakedness is yours. So, this idea then involves these relationships that undermine the very dynamic of family itself. St. Thomas Aquinas talks about why incest is morally wrong. And honestly, we will go through the rest of these because a couple of them are a bit unique. But he points out that incest is problematic for several reasons. One is that it undermines the emotional intimacy you would have and infuses it with sexual desire when there are plenty of relationships we should have that are free of that. And it undercuts the ability to have a society, an immediate family society that would be free of these plagues of jealousy and rivalry and distortion in this way. Secondly, he points out that if you were willing to commit incest and you're not really looking outside your home for a relationship, it's going to cut down on your circle of friends. Now, that might sound a bit tongue-in-cheek, but think about the importance it is for a man to leave father and mother behind and win someone over. There is a sense in which it makes romantic love a vehicle for entering into a bigger story, right? Of taking these smaller families and making them bigger ones, opening us up to that bigger story. And so again, the injunction against incest or any unlawful sexual contact for that matter is one that involves us entering a bigger story than we might have been tempted to settle for. Okay, so we'll go on. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter. So I guess that's like a first cousin or like a step sister. Okay, or the nakedness of your father's sister. Okay, the nakedness of your mother's sister, the nakedness of your father's brother. Do not approach his wife. Do not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. Do not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is the nakedness of her daughter. Now, these are where it gets a bit more, maybe not surprising, but I think clear that while polygamy was tolerated, even that had its limits. And we see in some of these, some implicitly what St. Thomas talked about, which is not crossing over family lines and undermining dynamics that would lead to bigger families and stronger families without rivalry. So, verse 17, do not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you marry her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter and uncover her nakedness. They are kindred. It's a depravity. So, this idea that to take a family like that and relate it to you in that sort of way distorts the nature of the family. And that to have a mother rivaling with her daughter over a common husband, I mean, yeah, I don't think I'm going to need to convince you that that's an issue. Do not marry a woman as a rival to her sister and uncover her nakedness in the other's lifetime. So notice in the other's lifetime, remember that there is that levirate marriage that we've talked about in the past where if a woman dies without, if a man dies without heirs, his brother can marry that woman to raise up seed, to raise up heirs for his deceased brother in a way to try to keep the family big. And again, this tolerates the practice of polygamy, but much of the Mosaic Law tolerated polygamy, even though it was an issue. But here, at least, it says that this would be an issue to marry two sisters in the lifetime of them both. Okay, and I think that's a dynamic that's fair to point out. Do not come near a woman during her period of uncleanness to uncover her nakedness. Do not have carnal relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. Do not allow any of your offspring to be offered up to Molech, and do not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. So we begin to have a mixture of ceremonial precepts and moral ones. So the issue of approaching a woman during her period of uncleanness, namely menstruation, is mainly a ritual cleanness. There's no sense in which someone would need to go to confession about that now. But it's again respecting the sense of how, well, there's this interplay of life and death, and the Hebrew Israelites were enjoined to have a respect and a separation for that. So yeah, I'll leave it there. That's far enough. Not having relations with your neighbor's wife should be fairly straightforward. But now, and not offering your offspring up to Moloch. So it moves here from ceremonial law to a moral law, adultery with your neighbor's wife, which is clearly immoral, and then moves to offspring to be offered up to Moloch. So taking that ritual law and applying a false ritual for something this vile, namely the idea of child sacrifice. Commentary here. This inclusion on the prohibition of sacrifice to Moloch is unexpected. Apparently, he shares the view of Deuteronomy 12 that child sacrifice was among the abominable practices for which the Canaanites were expelled from their land. So he adds it to the list of sexual offenses, which he believes are equally responsible. So there seems to be this sense in which the Canaanites are attributed, however fairly, I think relatively fairly, to this idea of sacrificing children to the gods. This was a very common practice in the Carthage, which descends itself from a Punic people, much like the Canaanites. So there's reason to think this is fair. Now, here's a verse that could get someone fired if they repeat it in the wrong context. Do not lie with a man as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. So, that's verse 22. Biblical and ancient Near Eastern culture was not familiar with this as in the sense of a defined orientation or lifestyle, but it acknowledges that the occasional act of male intercourse, usually as an act of force associated with humiliation, revenge, or subjugation, is problematic. So, another explanation, which has some recognition in Jewish tradition and certainly in Catholic tradition, Christian tradition, is that the Holiness Code views certain sexual acts that are not potentially procreative as aberrant. And this is the standard Catholic line. And it not only applies for two men, it would apply for anyone engaging in the same acts. You know, again, I'm not trying to tell you how to end your date in particular, but this is what the topic today goes into. I promise the Holiness Code doesn't stay here with the Sixth Amendment for much longer. But again, this becomes a bit of a hotbed issue because some have implied this word, it is an abhorrence, is sometimes rendered abomination. And so sometimes in the literature that seeks to discredit the biblical moral teaching, you'll see some attempt to say that this text is calling homosexual persons to be abominations, which it's not. It's calling the practice of a man engaging with another man in a sexual manner as an abomination. And an abomination here means that it's something you're not supposed to be thinking about or reflecting on. You know, it's something that you're supposed to be avoiding and not dwelling on. The way that various relationships and dynamics can be worth savoring. This isn't. That's what it's saying. You know, now, again, I could understand why someone who thinks that homosexuality is okay or is living that lifestyle actively would take issue with not thinking about it, but this is the teaching. And so this is something that often is written off as a ceremonial prescript, because some of the previous entries are ceremonial. But you see also that plenty of this list has, up till now, has been moral and ceremonial or ceremonial. There's been this whole mix. And the Christian tradition regards this as a moral prescript. And it calls it an abomination because we're not supposed to dwell on it or focus on it. Okay. Do not have carnal relations with any beast and defile yourself thereby, and let no woman lend herself to a beast to mate with it. It is a perversion. Fair? We can move on. Do not defile yourself in any of these ways, for it is by such that the nations I am casting out before you defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I called it to account. So that's the sense of these things. Verse 29. All who do any of these abhorrent things, such persons shall be cut off from their people. Now, cut off here means avoiding a social approbation or allowing the society to be tarred with the guilt or the practices that were tied here. And again, we live in an age where we rightly respect people more and we have a bit more of an individualistic mentality. And again, I think we're more ready to commiserate or to identify with people from whatever walk of life or set of preferences or proclivities they've come to cultivate or have come to find within their own hearts. Fine, you know. But I think this idea of being ready to cut off doesn't mean so much that you're called to shun anyone who falls short of the sexual demands of the gospel. But I think it lays out how we have to be very careful not to identify too closely with people. Again, ready to respect people, ready to try to understand why they make the choices that they make, ready to support them in the good they do, ready to call them to account on the evil that we see them doing, perhaps. But we cannot afford to get tied up in the decisions others have made and allow those decisions to speak for us. And often, I find many of the attempts to legitimize different relationships as emotional blackmail. It's either you support what I'm doing or you don't want me in your life. Well, there can be something else. There are plenty of people who don't identify with me being a Catholic priest all that well, who I've kept in my life. I don't see why that should be fair game for anyone else to insist on. You know, if we're to live in a common society with people who have various priorities, we have to be able to live together peaceably and respectfully in a way that allows us to maintain our differences as well. So, again, here when it talks about the context of cutting them off from the community, we're talking about a community of believers living in faith. And again, that this text was often ratified and finalized at a time when they didn't even have the political authority to do anything about it, is all the more reason to take it seriously. So I'll leave it there for now. Unless you want to keep hearing about incest, then I can go back to it later. Just put a message up, and yeah, we can read more about that. But I think we'll move on. I think we'd all agree that might be preferable. Chapter 19. So this holiness code, again, started with this sexual morality, but it goes to so much more. And you're about to see what that is. And rather than seeing these as individual things to check off a list, see them for the standard that they would set, particularly at a time when many were expected to look out for number one and to look out just for themselves. See how this opens up the moral horizons for someone who would have that kind of a tribal mentality. Because they are 12 tribes, right? The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." So again, remember before how it was, I am the Lord, I am the Lord. Now it's, you're to be holy, for I am holy. Okay? So this reflects the idea that only faithful observance of God's commands can the Israelite, only through them can the Israelite fulfill the sacred charge of being holy. Now, we as Catholics would identify too that it's God's holiness that enables us to be holy. We don't act in a good way so that we can be like God. Rather, God in his goodness enables us to imitate him. So again, the Hebrew tradition, and especially this Old Testament tradition, doesn't have a full enunciation of grace. When Christ in the gospel says, "Without me you can do nothing," he's laying out how his grace ensures that we're able to follow him. That's not as obvious here. This tends to look more like, keep doing these good things and you'll become better. But again, remember that he's speaking to those who exist in a grace relationship with God, right? The Lord speaks to Moses, saying this to those who enjoy the grace of the Old Testament. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You shall each revere his mother and father, and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Notice how some of these are going to resemble the Ten Commandments at first. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When you bring an offering of well-being to the Lord, sacrifice it, so that it may be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the day following. What is left by the third day must be consumed with fire. The idea that something sacred and sacrificed shouldn't be allowed to decay or get old or grimy or gross. And think about another offering offered on a Friday that was ratified and consumed by the third day. I think it'll come to mind. If it should be eaten on the third day, it's an offensive thing. It will not be acceptable, and he who eats of it shall bear its guilt. And for he has profaned what is sacred to the Lord. That person shall be cut off from his kin. So this idea of perversion in ritual acts alienates you from your fellow Israelite. That might sound petty, but this means to take something holy and make it an occasion of stumbling for others, and to stumble in it yourself by rejecting the rule that it demands. Okay, let's keep going. It keeps getting more interesting. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God. Do you ever do this? Do you ever do this all that much? Now, again, maybe you don't have a field, but let me backtrack. Is there a way in which you can do this? In what ways are you blessed? In what ways are you able to support those who aren't in the best place for whatever reason? I had a job once where there was an accounting error, and a foreman on the crew, he spotted it and said, "Hey, you tell the boss about this," because he wanted me to look good. So I obliged. I mean, strictly speaking, in honesty, I shouldn't have taken credit for that, but it was at the insistence of the person who caught it, and he was trying to give me a bit of a break. So, to say, maybe not engaging in that kind of fraud, but in looking to help other people get credit, in looking to give other people a shot, maybe there's something at work that you could delegate to someone so that they get the credit for it. Is there a way where you could leave your vineyard with a bit of fruit there for those who are without? And again, we come from a culture. I mean, you want to talk about, the sexual matters we were just talking about are controversial enough, but I think in a way this is even more controversial, is that idea that your property is your own, but it's not your own to dispose with entirely as you see fit, but it exists for the benefit of all. And that's not to guilt anyone into doing anything too ridiculous, but it does mean if you are able to extend the fruits of your labor, of your work, to others for their benefit, especially in a way that makes them fellow workers, gleaming from those fields, it could be a very good thing. Paying the local kids, or even making it a bit of a fall game. I don't know. Though I'm sure with liability, maybe your lawyer would want to talk you out of it. So don't follow my legal advice on this. But that's a different law. That's a much lesser law than the law of charity. So your call. You're living your life. I'm not giving you any particular advice. Moving on. So again, that idea, though, that you leave it for the poor and the stranger. This idea that, sometimes people can look down on immigrants who put a financial burden on our society, or they regard them as doing so. To a degree, we're called to forbear some of that burden. Now, again, if we gave everyone a house, a car, free health insurance, and schooling, and no penalty at all, and tens of millions of people came in a course of a few years, it would be a big problem. We can't just give everyone exactly what we would be able to do. But to make sure that people have the basics covered is contained in a commandment like this. Let's keep going. You shall not steal. You shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. Fair enough. No stealing and no lying, and they overlap pretty readily. You shall not defraud your fellow. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning. The idea that if you pay someone for the day, you pay him at the end of that day. Now, of course, we pay every 2 weeks, but that leaves it too. The idea that you're not to leave the people who work for you hanging, especially independent contractors or what have you, because they have a business to run or they have lives to lead, and you're obliged in justice to make sure that they're paid. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your Lord. I am your God. The idea that even when people have disabilities, that doesn't become an excuse for you to take advantage. You shall not render an unfair decision. Do not favor the poor or show deference to the rich. Judge your kinsman fairly. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not profit by the blood of your fellow. I am the Lord. Again, an idea that we're to judge fairly without leaving it to simply how things look or what particular group we would be tempted to back. We have to be ready to see the situation for what it is. I'm going to step right into it, but you saw this, for example, with Nicholas Sandman and the Covington Catholic folks, where people on one side were ready to paint the story one way, and people on another side were ready to paint it another way, based simply on the guy and how he looked and the name of the school he went to. Okay, and whatever the truth there was or is, that's not a fair way to judge anyone at first. You have to be ready to see the whole event for what it is. And again, this happens between criminals and cops. This happens between ordinary citizens and cops. We have to be ready to judge people on the merits without coming to a conclusion off the bat. Because there are some criminals who are innocent of the particular charge they might be facing, and there are plenty of ordinary people who are considered criminals for something that we come to a conclusion with out of context. And there are plenty of cops who are judged when it doesn't look good from the 8-second video. So you have to have the full story before you do. And that's what it's saying here. 17. You shall not hate your kinsman from his heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall take no vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So this idea then that we're not to incur guilt because of those who do wrong by bearing a grudge or by becoming hateful. Again, deeply wise. This is 1,200 years before Christ. Okay, now some ceremonial laws. You shall observe my laws. You shall not let your cattle mate with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with 2 kinds of seed. You shall not put on cloth from a mixture of 2 kinds of material. Okay, not something we have to hold to today. Now there's various forms of case law, things regarding vineyards or seducing another man's fiance, not selling your daughter into harlotry. Okay, these are things that I think we could agree on. Do not turn to ghosts and do not inquire of familiar spirits, nor be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God. So this idea that we're not to be superstitious or turn to spiritual forces to solve our problems or answer our questions, because it invites them into your life pretty quickly. And this remains an issue. People, you can find plenty of people who will take your money and promise to solve your problems. But be careful who you're inviting into the dynamic along with them. You shall rise before the aged and show deference to the old. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. So again, reverence for the elderly. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. I, the Lord, am your God. So the idea that you cannot live a life where you simply privilege your own people and look down on those who are foreign to you. And you don't need to take this in some sweeping way that amounts to one political platform or another. But it does mean that if your way of life in your country makes it difficult for some who are trying to enter in, that is something that ought to be reckoned with. And if it's holding some people back, this commandment is warning you. It really is warning you and me about what's at issue there. You shall not falsify measurements of length, of weight, or capacity. You shall have an honest balance, honest weights, and an honest ephah, and an honest hin. So the idea that when things are sold, they're to be sold with values that are clear, and especially before a time of standardized measurement, this was an issue. Okay. So for chapter 20, if anyone gives his offspring to Moloch, that is, if he sacrifices a child, he shall be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him. And I will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he gave his offspring to Moloch and so defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. By the time this was written down, the Israelites were in no capacity to carry out capital punishment. And so if these sentences were carried out, it was probably very rare. And more importantly, it shows rather the degree of guilt which is incurred, rather than something to practically do. So the point is, even if Israelites were to have a government now, which they do, I doubt they would enforce this law in its fullness. And even Christians, again, we don't have to accept the full ceremonial prescripts or the judicial prescripts or the old law as binding today. But even if we wanted to, we'd have to justify it in the context of things. And I don't think we would need to be stoning people all the time. Of course, killing a child is certainly worthy of some of these punishments. Hi. Yeah. And so it lays out this punishment for this, or for even for going astray on account of ghosts or familial spirits. That's familiar spirits, verse 6. I will set my face against that person and cut him off from among his people. So this idea, again, of social isolation in the face of idolatry or deep moral problems. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You shall faithfully observe my laws. If anyone insults his father or his mother, he shall be put to death, for he has insulted his father and his mother. His blood guilt is upon him. Again, the idea that this crime deserves death. If a man commits adultery with a married woman, committing adultery with another man's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall be put to death. If a man lies with his father's wife, it is the nakedness of his brother of his father that he's uncovered. The two shall be put to death. So again, these ideas of what these demand. And again, we don't need to hold to these punishments as ceremonial prescripts. But to say that these crimes are worthy of these penalties is something that I think we have to say on some level, even if in our present time and context we would want to apply more understanding. Understand that they had just received the Torah, they'd just been given the sense of what and how they are to act, and to be doing these things in the face of that, these are very serious crimes. Okay. If a man marries his sister, the daughter of either his father or his mother, they shall be excommunicated in the sight of their folks, as in cut off. Remember that line before? Okay. And so on. With irregular marriages, they're supposed to be cut off. The idea being that there has to be some regulation of some of this activity when it becomes problematic. And it sums up in verse 22 of chapter 20, you shall faithfully observe all my laws and all my regulations, lest the land in which I am bringing you spew you out. You shall not follow the practices of the nation that I am driving out before you, for it is because they did all those things that I abhorred them and said to you, you shall possess their land. So the idea then that the land is a place where Israel might live in faithfulness to the covenant they'd been given, and they're to be judged in how they act in such a way as to remain possessors of the land. And it's the miracle of miracles that when they were driven from the land, unlike any other nation which figured that their gods had failed them, they came to recognize and repent, recognizing that it was they who had abandoned God. And instead of abandoning their gods, they held to the God of Israel more ardently. And that's why we have Israelites, and we don't have Hittites or Canaanites or Egyptian polytheists. It's interesting how the true God has remained blessed among the nations. Okay, chapter 21. Speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, none shall defile himself for any dead person among his kin, except for the relatives closest to him, his father, his mother, his son, his daughter, and his brother, also for a virgin sister. But he shall not defile himself as a kinsman by marriage, and so profane himself. So the idea then that priests, because they are to remain ritually pure, have to keep somewhat aloof from burying some members of the family. Might seem a bit harsh, but there it is. Then there are regulations about how they're to shave and how they're not to cut themselves and not be profaned, how they're to hold to marrying women of a certain social standing. Um, yeah, why don't we kind of leave it there? To be a priest means to have things that would cause nothing of scandal in the community. And so their marriage should be without reproach. And again, it even comes to the point where just as the sacrifices of animals are not supposed to be irregular or blotchy or problematic, neither are the priests themselves. Verse 17, chapter 21. Speak to Aaron and say, no man of your offspring throughout the ages who has a defect shall be qualified to offer the food of his God. No one at all who has a defect shall be qualified. No man who is blind or lame or has a limb too short or too long. No man who has a broken arm or a broken leg, or who is a hunchback or a dwarf, or who has a growth in his eye, or has a boil scar, or scurvy, or crushed testes. Yeah, we went there. Well, because Leviticus went there. The idea then being that just as the sacrifice is to be integral and whole, the one sacrificing is to be integral and whole. Now, of course, there are priests today that I believe with one arm or who have various deformities. There's the beautiful story of St. Isaac Jogues, whose fingers were chewed off by those who would martyr him. And he actually had to go all the way back to Europe. He was a missionary in North America preaching to the Indians. But he went back to Europe for the approbation and permission to be able to offer mass with deformed fingers. And so just to say that there is a beauty in that sort of witness, but there's also a sense in which the priest shouldn't be a man so impaired that he's not capable of imaging the full measure of what it means to be holy, what it means to live in God. Sure, we call him in with plenty of baggage, any one of us, and you probably know it better than we can admit. But there is this sense where he's supposed to be able to hack it. He's supposed to be able to make do. And if he wouldn't be acceptable for some other trade, why would he be acceptable for one of the most sacred vocations out there? Okay. So, chapter 22 talks about how the sons of Aaron are to be scrupulous about the sacred donations that the Israelite people consecrate to the Lord, lest they profane his holy name. And so they're to take care not to be unclean. And they shouldn't be eating the sacred portions reserved to the priests while they are unclean. Okay. And there are ways to deal with that. Okay. Yeah, that's chapter 22. Chapter 23. This talks about the sacred rest of the Sabbath and how the sacred celebrations that are set time should be celebrated at the appointed time. Okay. The Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay. Then the Feast of Sheaves. So that's, I believe, the Feast of Weeks that begins to be talked about around verses 15, 16, 17. So that's interesting. Moving on. Verse 23, 24, 25. The seventh month, the first day of the month, you shall observe complete rest, a sacred occasion, commemorated with loud blasts. You shall not work at your occupations. You shall bring an offering by fire to the Lord. This is Rosh Hashanah, though it wasn't the first day of the year at that time. And then there's the Day of Atonement, which we just heard. So, quite interesting there. Then verse 33 talks about the Feast of Booths, how they're to live in these booths for 7 days. Okay, and bring offerings of fire, etc. Okay, wonderful. Why don't we move on? Chapter 24 talks about various ways to make sure that the olive oil is acquired, various things for how the priests are to be supported in their worship. Fine. Okay. But then there's an issue of blasphemy. Chapter 24, verse 10. And I think we'll leave it here. No. We have the Jubilee. No, we're going to just leave it right here because I don't want to do any of this poorly. I know that I flew through some of those last ritual prescriptions, but again, we're not obliged to follow them. And they're meant to give us some sense of what all of this entails. So we'll give Leviticus one last day, and I think we'll be able to move into Numbers right from there. Suffice it to say, purity and distinctiveness were so important, and we might look back on it and say, well, why was this important? But let's be fair. There are Jews still around when Hittites and Egyptians and Sumerians aren't. Okay, I know there are people from Egypt, but they're not building pyramids. They're not speaking Egyptian. They're speaking Arabic generally. The fact is that the Jews have been able to preserve their way of life in such a distinctive way, in part because of these rituals that are so onerous in various ways, and prevented them from mixing and mingling in ways that undermine their common heritage. And so maybe you've been tempted to roll your eyes at a few of the injunctions given here. And again, as Christians, we're not obliged to accept all of these as proper to our time and place. But I think we can't deny that this has been successful in preserving the people of Messiah and keeping them distinct from the other nations. And for that, I think we have to give God recognition and glory in all things, but in particularly those things that he wills. And he has certainly willed to constitute the people of Israel and make them a moral people that were worthy of consideration. And while we might shrug at some of these rules, I think some of them show that advanced moral reckoning with regard to how to deal with neighbor, with regard to how to be concerned for the poor, with regard to how to live lives of proper sexual propriety and familial life. I think there's nothing here that really involves apology. So, with that, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth.